Hello and welcome. My name is John Van Etten, and happy to join you today with yet another Human Synergistics webinar. Today's topic is on employee branding and organizational culture, and I am very excited today to be joined by Michael Bugge. Michael is not only an accredited practitioner, but a professor of human resource management at Hochschule Düsseldorf, and has great experience in using human synergistics tools, specifically the OCI, not only to measure culture, but for the purpose of developing employee branding. So a bit of a unique topic. We use our culture tools very often for developing engagement, motivation, safe, collaborative workplaces. And now we've got, I think, a bit of a unique topic around employee branding. So very interested to talk about this with you today, Michael. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, John, for inviting me and the place here to present our results from this project with a company called Aream. It's a green private equity company, a small one, about 50 people joining it. And there was really some mismatch between expectation of applicants and the real life they got to see when they enter the company, and that was actually the trigger to start this project. And let me dive into some points here of this project, just to give you some insights about employer branding. And OCI is also a tool to use it for employer branding strategies, I would say. Fine, thank you.
So yes, let's start. Looking forward.
I just to get a short insight what's Aream actually is. We see here a company, Smart Green Assets. It's asset management. It's for institutional investors, not for private investors, but into institutional investors. So it's a classical B2B business here, and what actually makes it a bit different from other companies like banks or investor companies where private customs are involved. That's a bit different here. They are focusing on this renewable energies like solar industry or wine and winecraft. And we see here the pictures actually what are the main points here with solar and these windmills here we see. That's actually the financing that projects, bigger projects. And we got a roadmap here actually. I apologize. Yes, introduction should it be, not Einleitung. It's German. German word here.
Oh, good. We're flexible.
Yeah. And I already make some hooks. We are not through completely. So it's like a medium step I can report from. And we see here we start with a leadership training and an assessment of the should be profile already with the help of OCI, just to get a deeper insight what is actually the wanted culture of the leadership team. That was the first step. Next step was a complete assessment of all Aream staff, where we saw 36 people joining this assessment here, also with OCI, and to match it with the current cultural situation. And so we get something like a gap analysis here, I would say. And this is mapping the current recruiting process as a candidate journey. That was the wish of the HR manager, female, already former student of Hochschule Düsseldorf. So the contact was binded here by this link, and the candidate journey was something what is focusing on the touch points to applicants, and that is where cultural norms could also communicate, not only window dressing to communicate some values which are not really there, but to communicate cultures which are actually there or at least wanted, and in a management focus. So that's what we set up already, this candidate journey. We made also some qualitative interviews with fresh hired employees, just to make it a bit more explorative. Because it's OCI is actually a quantitative design with closed answers, and here was a free answer possible. And so we got some more insights what actually were the discrepancies between expected from the reacted or from the recruiting process and the actual, what these applicants get to know or recognize after a couple of months staying with the company. So that's what this step here. And so my last step here in this process was building up a concept, employer branding, based upon the steps 1 to 3 here. And just an orientation, we got this German Employer Branding Academy called DIBA, and that's a good reputed 18-step way to build up an employer branding strategy and to implement it and to improve it all the time. It's a reflection loop as well, just to make it better and better. And these are the 18 steps in my concept. And there's a very, very strong step 7. I come to it later on, where we have to obey these cultural norms, where we have to see what is actually the should be profile, what is a wanted profile, and just to make an authentic communication possible.
Very nice.
Wow. Okay. So
yes.
That was
Thank you.
Should I proceed?
Yeah, please. No, I love the structure. I think this is really helpful. One of the most common requests we get is not just about the tools that we provide, but really how they're used, the steps that are carried out to implement. So really appreciate the insights. Thank you.
Fine. So let's proceed. And we see here 3 levels of brand building divided in 4 phases, 18 steps. It's very near to this DIBA concept. It's not really necessary to inhale that. It's just to giving a structure here. And these are the 4 steps here: setup, analysis, strategy forming, and then implementation, and this leading a brand. I call it employer brand management. And this is a picture here, still in German tongue. Yes, it's hard to, well, it's a bit harder to translate a given graphic here. But in the essence, I would say these are the 4 steps we found here in this picture to erect an employer brand and Arbeitgebermarke. Yes. And when we see here, these 18 steps are already mentioned, divided into these 4 major steps here. We see especially this point 7, I would mark out, this cultural analysis with the staff. That's actually the point where OCI helps us a lot to get a systematic overview, what it should be and what is the actual culture in this company Aream. That was really the phrase here. And yes, just a question, John.
No, thank you. Keeping up with you. Thank you.
Okay. So when we see this picture here, to apologize once more in German tongue, but it shows us how we can come to this cultural analysis, set up and kick off, going through these different steps here. And the last step, which is red marked here, is the qualitative analysis. with employee focus groups to get similarities and differences or discrepancies in culture, mapping it. This should be an actual culture. And that is actually where the point where we use the OCI instrument as a systematic, quantitative, and good reputed cultural model to make this qualitative analysis a bit more, I would say, structured. Because when we only make an explorative, qualitative design, it's very hard to evaluate these statements, and so it makes it much easier with a good reputed cultural model here, like OCI, to come to a result quicker than with an explorative design. And quick is very helpful.
Very important today.
Very important today, and that we see in the OCI a very good tool to do so. And if we look at this attractiveness of employers, we have two major groups here in this DBAR model. What's actually the meaning of attractivity is the relation of instrumental and symbolic attributes to a company's attractiveness as an employer. That's actually a definition we found in personal psychology. It's already more than 20 years old, but still actually still current here to use it. We see an instrumental factors here, like working times and compensation. That's a hard fact, I would say, but also some symbolic factors. And there we find the culture of companies as a very important point for attractiveness. And we see that in current studies as well, that culture of companies is often a factor to leave a company as well. If we have a bad culture, that's often the case, or often the reason to leave a company. And so the symbolic or emotional factor becomes at least more weighting to the instrumental factor as well.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the idea behind that, and that's a picture. It's not quite sharp, but you could help me. It's a German share of your slide here, coming from the should be culture. That's not the N 21 is it's an example. It's not our Aream example here. It's a generic example we see here on this slide, and we first have to make a diagnosis to the should be culture. What is the expected culture or the wanted culture? What are the supported values here? And then we need some, and when that's case of the analysis, we need some reason why there is a discrepancy between the current or actual culture and the should be culture. And the model here of human synergistics says, okay, there could be some reason in structures in the systems, in the working conditions, but also the competences of the employees. That could also be, and of the leadership employees as well. So, and then we see a typical field here in the should be. We have a very strong blue field where we see, okay, that's constructive. That's the part where we want to work together, cooperation, error culture, all these points here. There's often the picture, and I can spoil it already. It's nearly the same picture at Aream as well, that we have a big blue field and there should be culture, and a smaller blue field in the actual culture. That's a typical picture we see here. What indicates there is some need for cultural development, and that's fine in this OCI model to give very clear recommendation coming to a so-called constructive culture. And that is what we see here, that we have to minimize the red one as expected, to minimize the green defensive style, and maximize this blue constructive area. Okay, so these are actually the way we use it here. And so it is, let me say, a bystanding result when we see it's not only making this cultural analysis for employer branding, but also as a fundament for cultural development at all at Aream. And so they use it also for cultural development, and there's the loop to employer branding, because to be authentic, I have to alter the cultural norms in reality. It's not only window dressing to communicate, oh, these are constructive values, and that is what we want to do. And that might give some mismatches afterwards when the applicants say, okay, you say you are this or this culture, but what I really see after 3 months or 4 months is a complete different culture. It's much more in this red or green fields. Yeah. So it's not authentic. So cultural development also is imminent or implicit when we talk about employer branding or authentic employer branding, because we need the cultural journey then.
Yeah, indeed. No, just to reiterate that point, because I think what you're describing is incredibly helpful and something that a lot of leaders could benefit from. I mean, what we're looking at on this screen is two profiles. One on the left is, as you've described, what this organization is describing should be taking place within the business. In the case of this specific organization, that was defined and described exclusively by people within the leadership levels of the business. But the point is that this is not coming from human synergistics. This is coming from your people, your organization, your industry, so that you have the ability to describe what should be taking place, what is good behavior here, what's appropriate here, what do we need here, and be very clear and specific on that. So that's completely customized to what we, and that's the profile on the left. The profile on the right hand side is what is currently playing out within the organization's culture, the current state. And this really, again, I say it a lot, but this is not about right or wrong. It's not that one of these is good and the other is bad. It's simply the profile on the right, I would say, is our starting point. This is where we are right now. And on the left, we've described what represents excellence, good leadership, the kind of brand that we want to put forward to our people. So now we know where we are and we know where we're going. And that, I think, is the transparency that this framework provides, that really gives clarity to our clients so that they can understand not only what is happening and how that's affecting employee branding and other things, but in the current culture, but more importantly, maybe the direction forward for our culture, so we can talk about and think about and support that development and growth moving forward. It's one thing to talk about, we need good employee branding. It's another thing to understand, well, what does that mean? What do they need to see from me? What should I be encouraging in my team? Those actions that we need to take to drive that outcome. I'm sorry, I'm going to interject one more point. You said it really nicely before in terms of things like employee branding, the commitment that people have to the organization, and even things like employee turnover. The frequency with which people leave organizations is predicted by several things, and you can identify. You mentioned hard factors like salary and so on, and other factors like culture. Culture, we can demonstrate and has been demonstrated, is the most influential. If you really look at what drives, both what attracts people to organizations, what encourages people to stay in the organization, is culture. it's sort of interesting to look at, and I can explain it in more detail with our how culture works model. But it's sort of interesting as a leader to recognize what really is driving that kind of performance. And while lots of things matter, like how we pay our people and how we select and all of those, actually what has the greatest impact is culture. And that by focusing our efforts on developing a business in which our people are primarily focusing their attention on the goals and how we're going to get there, their unique experiences on ideas and creativity that they can bring across, their ability to support and help one another, work collaboratively and cohesively, right? That is the kind of culture that we as leaders should encourage, not only for our values, but to drive that kind of brand. And again, having that direction in terms of how we need to channel our efforts to drive this kind of performance, again, I think is very helpful. Sorry for interjecting so long. I appreciate these insights.
Well, it's fine. Many thanks for your comprehensive view here on this picture. And we see it, these are real data here. We see it here. There should be 12 leaders, and here the complete staff, inclusive leaders. And even more than in the generic example we saw some slides before, it's a very huge gap here. We see actually, it's a very small constructive part here, a very small blue field, but a very big blue field in the wanted culture. And so it's actually a hard way to go for this company, and to how to encourage the staff and how we can improve, or I would say improve the culture is the right word, that implicit or there's an implicit message in it that to do it much better. But we see that there are some negative aspects, and when we see aggressive or passive defensive styles, and there's a very strong congruence we see in one part of the aggressive style, and that might be delivered by the very sales-driven culture in this company. So there's not a long way to go. But on the other field, we see, especially in the greens, that there is a very small field or small extensions here in the should be culture, but a very strong or very huge part of green in the current culture. That's also that we see. Okay, that's not so much in the red ones, which have to be altered, but it's more between the passive defensive styles and the constructive styles to exchange. That would be my interpretation here. And we see it here in the interpretation you made in the slides. Aream sees itself as a competent partner for successful investments in sustainable energy provision through quick, flexible, and adjustable assets management. So we see here a mission statement or value statement, what actually is more customer driven. And what defines more the relationship between customer and Aream, but not so much within the company, not so much between the employees. Only the last one here, solidarity amongst our employees. That is something what is really astonishing in such a capitalistic company like private equity, the word of solidarity, which actually is a word like socialism also. So we already see there is some idea of cooperation, collaboration, working together, but it's not so strongly defined. It's not so operational, I would say, that can understand, and especially the leadership can understand what to do. So we use the OCI model to come to very concrete more or less precise recommendations, which helps to get a better understanding what's actually the meaning of solidarity amongst our employees.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah, I hate to interrupt again, but this is one of my favorite things to do with organizations and leadership teams. On your last slide, where having the values on one side of and the circumplex model on the other, and really what you're seeing there is, when we read through the values and mission statement of the organization and we think about what that's describing. And this is a fun exercise to do. It's very easy to start to recognize which behaviors or patterns of behavior in the human synergistics model are consistent with those values. And one of the things leaders will consistently find is that your values are always essentially up there in the blue. We won't sideline this discussion in terms of why that is, but I think that is very helpful for leaders, because just as you said, it's nice to know that our values are solidarity, but what does that actually mean? What does that mean in terms of how I should interact with my team, what I should be role modeling? What are the actions that represent that? And I find that bridge is very helpful, really, for everyone in the organization, because it's amazing how often we know the values, but we don't know how to live those values or role model them effectively. And that's what the circumplex, I think, gives us. On that last slide, when you're looking at the mission and that idea, that's really the same information. Our value statement written in text as compared to our values as captured in patterns of behavior. What do we need to do to live those values? And it's things like, striving for excellence and being supportive of one another and so on. But again, I find that's more helpful for people than the values alone, because now we know what we need to do. And we also know what's actually happening in the business right now. Sorry. Thank you.
Exactly the point, John. It's not understandable. You have to translate it in behavior. How should we conduct people? How should we lead people? And to make it more easier to understand what are helpful behaviors and leadership patterns, and what are leadership patterns which are a bit in conflict with our wanted cultural norms. And that's actually come to the next steps. And this is a slide I got from Aream itself, where they try to derive here some recommendation out of these findings of the OCI analysis. And not rather astonishing, the first point, promoting constructive behavior, constructive in the meaning of the model, what actually means more appreciation, active compliments, positive feedback to leaders and staff. So we find here in a translation of Aream itself, they make some workshops after the OCI analysis and find, okay, how could we translate it in concrete behavior? What should leaders do to foster this constructive behavior? And that's a first finding here: more appreciation, involvement in decision making, to make more consulting or participating elements valid here in this culture. Early consulting before decision making, not after decision making on a reporting, so you can't alter anything. But it's especially of concerned employees, that are employees which are really have a known competence to help in the decision making, but there are another way around is that they are affected by a decision, and so there is something like a stakeholder idea to say, okay, they have the right to be involved in the decision making because they are affected of the decision, and that helps to foster constructive behavior here. And the last one, they see here fostering humanity and motivation. It's a bit it's an overall characteristic, I would say, humanity. That's what when we see a closer look here, focusing on personal development, continuing education, what actually means as a preparation for this era culture, but also the idea every human being is can learn. Yeah, it's not
Grow.
ended. Can grow and learn. So it's a positive thinking that human being can change their behavior, can change their attribution and all these things. So that is actually the meaning of fostering humanity. It's a bit uncertain terminology, but they use it, and so when they understand what's the meaning of it, it's fine. For me, the sentence focusing on personal development is much more clear to foster continuing education. The second point, minimizing passive defensive value structures, is a corresponding to the first point. To make blue bigger means make green smaller. that's a
Part of it.
corresponding pillars, I would say. Yeah?
Mhm.
And so the reduction and the yes saying culture should be minimized. That's already something when we talk about career ambitions, loyalty, all these points. That there are factors which strengthen the yes saying culture, and the problem of the yes saying culture is actually, you know that, John, that the decision making could be in a wrong decision, could end in a wrong decision, because not all perspectives on the decision are on the table, are transparent. So just considering any career ambition, just say yes, big thing, chief. You make it good, and that's not really the own opinion. It's what we say, an instrumental opinion to get some privileges in career development, for example. And that's something what is not good for an organization, actually, and that is part of the passive defensive value structures, which should be minimized. Aream identified that and said, okay, we have to reduce this yes say culture. We must bring more psychological safety in it, to have another opinion, to have another idea, and to express this idea, to have the safety or feeling of the safety to express this. Might be conflicting or opposing arguments, that might be, but it is something what constructive culture could foster if people feel comfortable to do so. Let's say.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, not to get off topic, but that's one of the differences I usually talk about between, in our model, what we call affiliative versus approval-oriented behavior. So this is sort of how, along the lines of, agree. Approval is that saying yes, going along with others, trying to keep everyone happy, saying what people want to hear, not what they need to hear. Excuse me. And that's a security oriented style. Psychologically, we're doing that because we feel that, for one reason or the other, I can't share the truth. I can't, share my unique ideas. And that kind of behavior as a pattern will cost the team and the organization, just like you described. If I'm holding back and not sharing my ideas, then the team can't benefit from those ideas. And those were probably some good ideas, at least a few of them that I had, but now we, as a team, as an organization, we can't benefit from that. And that's something you see just pervasive in organizations, that we have the right ideas, we have people with the knowledge and experience, but we're failing to leverage it. We're failing to encourage them to share it and contribute to their full potential. And this, again, isn't about right or wrong. It's not that we have the wrong culture right now. Our culture has gotten us this far, but the developmental conversation is moving forward. What do we need? And getting clear on what drives our business forward, and what doesn't. Or in other words, where we it's not that defensive behavior, again, is bad. It's just that it's not consistent with our values, and it holds us back from the kind of excellence that our business is really about, and our leaders and people, strive to achieve. So knowing what that direction is, I think, is part of the help that these tools provide, so that we know, really where to focus your efforts.
Yes, yes. I agree upon that, and it's quite clear, or quite near to the field of reducing aggressive defensive elements. We saw in this Aream case that there's not so much discrepancies between the should be and the actual culture and the red fields. So these aggressive elements, aggressive defensive elements, are not so, let me say, offending the leaders and the staff. So, but very near to it, really is what we already see in the yes saying culture, is the error culture. And that's an error tolerance, where we say, okay, that's if there is an error which occurs, you can bring it in. You don't have to cover it. You don't have to try to eliminate it, hide it without seeing it by others. And so this error culture is something which is very near actually to the passive defensive value structure. When we see here that is giving psychological safety as well, because we foster this cooperation, not competition. Because competition always means I have to be excellent. I'm not allowed to make errors, and if an error occurs, I have to hide it, because otherwise I'm not excellent anymore, and so I'm not competitive in the team. And that's something where the complete culture actually has to change. So that's an interesting profile we see here at Aream, because I'm not quite clear how the company will tackle that, to stay more or less the same in the red case, but changing the green fields. But we will see that. We talk about 1 year later with a new OCI analysis to have a longitude view on it. But I would say this error culture, error tolerance is the major point in this company. It's a major point because it defines itself a bit by excellence, by perfectionism. And so this error culture is really a hard way to go for this company. But I think it makes it much better and could foster collaboration patterns as well.
Yeah. And error cultures, and that's something we encounter quite frequently, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, companies and organizations don't want to be making mistakes. Mistakes are costly, and obviously. So we as leaders try to put and communicate people's attention in terms of the kinds of mistakes that can happen, But it's very interesting in terms of how much we need to push that message and where the balance is, because while it's important, of course, to communicate what mistakes we don't want and those sorts of things, we also need to be communicating what we do want, the goals we do want you to achieve, what decisions you can make, right? And we need to be sending a little bit more of those. Anyway, so it's very often in organizations that you find leaders sort of unintentionally overemphasizing the risk, and that plays into the security orientation of, okay, we need to avoid the risk. I don't want to be held responsible for that kind of thing. I don't want to be seen making that kind of mistake. And that risk aversion, if we build it too much unintentionally, holds people back from making decisions, pushing things forward, trying new things, sharing when they actually made a mistake so that we can learn from that. So getting that balance right is very, very difficult and challenging for leaders. And so often you find in organizations, we've gone a little too far, and that's good to know, so that we can, again, moving forward, recognize where we should be putting our focus and attention. People got the message that, we shouldn't be making mistakes. Now more of our focus and efforts with our people needs to be around things like how we share information, learn from each other, best collaborate, those sorts of things.
Fine. Okay.
Very good.
Cheers. Absolutely.
Yes.
So I'm through with my presentation here about
Okay.
Aream.
Thank you.
Janu, do you have any further questions? John.
I do have a few questions, by the way. Let me put out a little banner here for anyone who is who's following along and has a question. Please feel free to type those into the chat, and happy to bring those up and talk about those live. In the meantime, one of the things I wanted to bring up is that this, employer branding, I think, is a great example of, of organizational culture and the influence that culture has on the employee experience. You mentioned actually several things, not only employee branding, but another great outcome is psychological safety. Again, something that's very strongly driven and influenced by culture. And so anyway, that, recognizing that cause and effect. So the reason I love this example as well is I hope the people who are listening to this can also relate to it, because employee branding, I think that's something most of us can relate to, whether we think about the organization that you're a member of now, or, a university that you've gone, whatever that is, there's that time period in which, before you went to university or before you joined the company that you're with right now, you had some expectation around what it's going to be like to study there, work there, right? And you probably read about the company and their website, and you heard all these wonderful, great things about what a creative place this is, where you can, and then there's the experience of joining that organization. And the first 6 months, I always say, is a really interesting time in which we compare our actual experience, current culture, with that sort of idealized perception of the business. And I always recognize that, people are usually able to recognize a few things. Well, I thought this would be very creative and adapt based on, but as I join, I find that I'm not able to do that really. And the point really is also that the distance in that gap is important. It's sort of like cognitive dissonance. The more in an organization we have a gap and we can recognize it, even if we don't use human synergistics tools, if we're talking about this as a place where people take ownership and share ideas and support one another, but that is not the way we live and work on a day-to-day basis, right? That difference is something that employees experience, and it is something that we know drives stress, frustration, and things like employee turnover makes it more difficult for us to attract best talent, retain best talent. So it's not only, again, important to know what our values are, it's important to know how we live those values, and what we can do to make that our culture, and that kind of positive culture that matches our values is the sort of thing that makes people feel engaged, motivated, psychologically safe, and that their efforts count. And in those kinds of organizations, people more often stick around, contribute more, and drive better performance. So that's what it's all about. Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
true. That is true. Lovely. All right. Last call for any questions from anyone in the audience. Michael, Bugge, Dr. Bugge, thank you again for all of your insights. Can't thank you enough. We talk about these topics very often in accreditation, how these tools can be used. OCI doesn't just measure culture, but also all sorts of things that are influenced by culture, like employee engagement, motivation, and retention, and so on. So anyway, it's fun to talk about that in theory, but I think it's even more fun to talk about that in reality and see how organizations and leaders are using the tools, the benefit that they're getting from that information, and how they use it and act on it. So I'd love to invite you back again in the future, maybe 6 months down the road when they've taken some of those steps. Love to see it, because that's really what it's all about. And for anyone who's interested in using human synergistics tools, as much information as they give you about the current state, I think their purpose is more about creating that future state. So what we can learn from this, how we can direct our efforts with greater clarity and consistency. So That's what it's all about. Thank you, Dr. Bugge, for your input. Really appreciate it. This is being recorded, will be posted on our website. If anyone has any questions or if there's anything that we can do to support, please feel free to reach out. Thank you again, Dr. Bugge, and thank you anyone
Thanks
for
to you. Yeah, to
nice.
show his results. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you as well to Aream for sharing their results. Very difficult in many cases to share that, and again, that's a special thing that give us the chance to actually see that. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.